Okay, so we are going to be covering the Islamic world, chapter 10 in this video. We're just doing the first half, or the early Islamic art is what we're going to cover this week, and then next week we'll move on to later, because there's actually quite a bit to go over. So I'm going to keep my window open for a little bit because I've been having trouble with my recorder just stopping. And I can't tell if it stopped if I'm in presentation mode. So we'll begin talking about Muhammad. He was born in 570 in the area of the Arabian Peninsula, which is basically this peninsula here. Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, I believe, are part of the peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula. And during the time Muhammad was born, the Byzantine and Sassanian empires were thriving. The Byzantine would have been kind of on the eastern area of the Mediterranean, and I believe the Sassanian Empire might have been like in Iraq and stuff in this area. I'm not totally sure about the Sassanian, but I know the Byzantine was here. But the Arabic people were typically merchants or nomadic herders who worshiped many gods. However, in less than 70 years after the Prophet Muhammad was born, his Muslim people would come to rule many lands beyond Arabia, actually. Not Syria, Iraq, and then it would actually go into North Africa, and even more time, it would spread even further. So Muslim means those who submit in Arabic, and Islam is the religion of the Muslims. And Muhammad was the prophet and teacher who brought Islam to the world stage. And the word Islam means submission to the one God, who would be Allah, basically. Allah was their god. And Islam spread to the Middle East and North Africa eventually, where it was actually replaced late antique art, which was the last phase of the Greco-Roman art that we covered. And in the 13th century, Islam came to India and spread into Asia. So, in fact, the most famous building in India in Asia is the Taj Mahal, which is basically an Islamic mausoleum or large tomb. And Islam spread actually even into Spain as well. So the Muslims, overthrew the Christian kingdom of the Visigoths in 711 in Spain. And at Cordoba in Spain, Abd al-Rahman I founded the Spanish Muslim dynasty that actually profoundly influenced medieval Europe. So that Spanish empire here, the Muslim, actually ended up really influencing a lot of art in other parts of Western Europe as well. So we'll talk a little bit about Cordoba in Spain, and there's a great mosque there that began in 784, and it continued to be added to throughout the 9th and 10th centuries, and it actually became the largest Islamic mosque in the Western world. And here it is. Here's a view of the mosque here, an aerial view, and you can see it is quite large. It actually features a lot of overlapping horseshoe-shaped arches that adorn the eastern and western gates, and there are also double rows of arches, and 500 columns and piers are present in the prayer hall of this mosque. And elaborate multi-lobed arches on slender columns form frames in the mascura, which is a hall reserved for the ruler. The mascura at Cordoba connects the mosque to the palace. So the mascura is the hall reserved for the ruler, and it actually connects the mosque itself to the palace. And there's a lot of intricate, delicate patterns present on the interior, specifically in the largest dome, but basically the walls are covered with pattern and marbles and mosaics. And the Great Mosque at Cordoba is just a really good example of Islamic architecture because it follows a lot of the things that Islam is known for. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, we're going to talk about Islam a little bit before we launch into the Dome of the Rock here. So Islam arose in Arabia, like I said, on the Arabian Peninsula earlier, in the 7th century when Muhammad began to receive revelations or messages from the god Allah. And Allah means one true God. And like I said earlier, Islam and Muslim rule spread very swiftly. So basically the area of Eastern Mediterranean, which was the Byzantine Empire, became Muslims. And the Muslims were able to overthrow the Middle East, which was where the Persian Empire was. And all of North Africa was converted into Muslim by 710. And the Muslims pushed into Spain. And they tried to get into France, but they were unsuccessful in large part due to the Pyrenees mountain range that straddled the border of France and Spain. And Spain was the main Western Muslim stronghold in the western part of Europe, and it held out until 1492, where I believe the Spanish religion changed to Catholicism, I believe. So military might definitely contributed to the spread of Islam, but the appeal of their religion was also a big player. It spread far and wide, and today it's still one of the world's major religions, and its history has been hugely influential on a global scale. So, I mean, the Muslims are definitely known for making significant contributions in astronomy, medicine, natural sciences, and even during the 12th and 13th century, Christian scholars used Arabic translation of the Greek writers. So actually, without the Arabic scholars or Muslim scholars, we wouldn't have a lot of the Greek texts that survive today. So Muhammad is referred to as the final prophet by the Islam religion, and he came after Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. And he was born in Mecca, which is in the Arabian Peninsula, in 570 to a family of merchants. And Muhammad was always critical of the polytheistic religion of his fellow Arabic people, and in 610, when he was actually 40, he began to receive messages or revelations from the god Allah through the archangel Gabriel. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Gabriel, but I guess he's a major player in the Islamic tradition. And Muhammad and his followers were persecuted, so they fled Mecca to a town called Medina, which is the city of the Prophet in Arabic. And Islam dates its beginnings from this first flight, known as the Hijra, I believe, which is Arabic for immigration. In 630, Muhammad returned to Mecca with 10,000 soldiers, and I believe at this time he would have been close to 60 years old. I might have done my math wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was close to 60 years old. And they took control of the city and converted everyone to Islam by destroying all the idols. And he actually kept the building that had the cubicle that had all the cubicles that housed the idols, and it was called the Kaaba, from Arabic for cube. And this is just kind of, a general timeline. And Muhammad died in Medina in 632. So basically 2 years after his armies defeated Mecca, he died. So he would have been around 60. The Quran is Islam's sacred book, codified by the Muslims ruler Uthman. And it records Muhammad's revelations, and the word Quran means recitations, a reference to Gabriel's instructions to Muhammad in 610 to recite the name of God. And the Quran is composed of 114 surahs or chapters divided into verses. So they have a lot of verses in their Quran. And there are 5 pillars of Islam, the first being that each Muslim needs to have faith in the one God, Allah, and they must worship 5 times a day facing Mecca, and give alms to the poor, and during the first month of Ramadan, they must fast, and once in a lifetime, if possible, they need to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. So all of those things are very important to Islamic people. They're the 5 pillars of Islam. And Muslims are also guided by Muhammad's words, ways, and customs in the Hadith, which is called Hadith, I believe, and it's recorded in the Sunnah, the Prophet's Clear Path. It's a book, I believe. And it kind of gives Muslims solutions to everyday ethical problems. And the reward for being a good Muslim or being a good Islamic worshiper is that you have paradise, much like, heaven for Christians. So it has a lot in common with Judaism and Christianity. And Muslims think of their religions as a continuation, a completion of those other religions. Islam incorporates many Hebrew biblical teachings, and it rejects idol worship, much like Hebrew biblical teachings. But unlike Jesus, Muhammad did not claim to be divine. He's just merely God's messenger, the final prophet who perfected the faith of the Jews and Christians, basically. So Islam, is viewed by Islamic people as being a more perfected, complete version of the other religions, like Judaism or Christianity. It's also simpler in organization. Muslims worship God directly without the hierarchy of rabbis, priests, or saints acting as intermediaries. And in Muslim political culture, social and political worlds are very intertwined. There's no separation of these elements. Like here we have separation of church and state, but, in these areas they tend to have more, everything's just very intertwined with religion, I guess. And after Muhammad's death, the caliphs, which is the Arabic word for successor, continue to practice of uniting religious and political leadership in one ruler. So, religion and political power were very much intertwined, and the caliph is basically like the ruler in Arabic. So we're going to be talking a lot about caliphs in this chapter, and what caliph means is just that this is the ruler. So just try to remember that moving forward. So we'll talk about architecture. In the early years of Islam, the main political and culture center was the Fertile Crescent in the area of Mesopotamia, which is Syria and Iraq. And the Muslim caliphs were basically the successors of Muhammad. And you can just think of them as rulers, like I said. And they built on a very large scale, the caliphs did, the successors of Muhammad. So they built a lot. And the major areas in the early days were the Middle East. But other early examples of Islamic architecture can be found in North Africa, Spain, and Central Asia. And we will talk about those as we move forward. So first one we'll talk about is the Dome of the Rock, and this is in Jerusalem. And it was actually captured from the Byzantines in 638 by the Muslims, and the first great Islamic building was erected there in 687 and 692 by the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik. Kind of hard to say. The structure is called the Dome of the Rock, and it's in Jerusalem, and we can see it here. Originally, the Hebrews had the Temple of Solomon in this location, but the temple was actually destroyed, rebuilt several times before it was destroyed, and the Dome of the Rock was finally built here in this location and still survives to this day. And the Dome of the Rock was built in the late antique style from the Mediterranean world. It's basically a domed central plan that is descended from the Pantheon, and it actually looks, might more closely resemble the octagonal San Vital from Chapter 9 in Ravenna. The octagonal platform that the dome rests on is referred to as the Noble Enclosure, so that would be this area down here. According to a Muslim historian, the inspiration for the Dome of the Rock was a neighboring Christian monument, the Antasis Rotunda of Constantine's Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I'm not quite sure how to say that, Sepulchre. Dome of the Rock features a 75-foot tall double-shelled wood dome. And the dome itself is so large that the octagonal structure below it basically serves simply as a base for the